Scripture reading today is from the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This story of Jesus' encounter with a woman from a land probably about 30 miles from the Sea of Galilee, where he had been prior to this, is a bit disturbing, isn't it? Earlier in this gospel, Jesus has healed many people. But when this woman, out of her mind with concern for her daughter, approaches Jesus, he keeps walking. His disciples want only to shut her up. She's persistent. So what's going on here? Why is Jesus so cold toward this woman when she comes to him for help? The story comes to us from the author of the Gospel of Matthew, somebody who himself has heard this story from another source. We see the story in a different version in Mark. To get some insight into what's going on here, I tried, as I prepared to be here today, to try to view this story from two perspectives, from the perspective of the woman and from the perspective of Jesus. And I would like you to hear the story from the woman this morning. My daughter was sick, so sick, tormented sick. I had done everything I knew to do. I'd talked to every healer I knew. It was like a sword through my heart seeing her like that. I felt pinned against a wall, helpless. I was willing to try anything, to do anything. Still, even I was surprised at what I did. I had heard that Jesus, the man that some Jews called Rabbi and others called Lord, was in the area. Word had traveled ahead of him, saying that the blind could now see, lepers were now clean, even that a man's young daughter had been risen from the dead. Certainly, he could heal my daughter too. And he was getting closer. He had been along the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he had moved to Tyre, and I heard that he was moving from Tyre up the coast towards Sidon, directly toward me. I hesitated. Jesus was, after all, a Jew, and I a Canaanite woman. A mere dog in his eyes. Probably worse. You see, the Jews thought of my gods as mere idols, and my people as enemies since the time of the great flood. Why would Jesus pay attention to me? Why would he hear my pleas? But I had to try. I had to beg for my daughter. I had to believe in the hope of the stories. Another's daughter raised, others' sons and daughters healed. My faith was in this, that if this man were of God, he would see my need, hear about my daughter's pain. And then suddenly one day he was there, walking through the village, the dust from the dry road billowing up around his ankles. I could tell it was him. It was just as the people had said. He traveled, his followers, heading north through the village towards Sidon. I didn't have time to think what to do. Suddenly I was running along beside them, shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David, for my daughter is tormented by a demon." He barely glanced my way. Just enough for me to know that he had heard me. To know just as surely that he had chosen to ignore me. I could hear myself continuing to shout, "Have mercy on me, Lord, my daughter, please." I overheard the men who were with him say something to him. They were telling him to send me away, to try to get me to quit shouting. He said something back to them that I couldn't hear, but I didn't care. I knew only that I had to get closer to beg for my daughter. I ran up ahead of the group, into the middle of the road where they were walking, and I threw myself on my knees, right in front of him. And I looked up at him, and I said, "Lord, please help me." He stopped. He looked around, and then he said in my direction, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." My heart stopped. And then it pounded, and I stood up, and I met his eyes, and I said, "Yes, Lord, but even dogs like me eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Please help me." He looked at me then, really deeply looked at me. I'll never forget the words he said to me. "Great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And then he walked on. He stood there in the road, dazed. The people who were with him parted around me and went on up the road towards Sidon. His words and his gaze had been so electrifying, but I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know if I dared believe them. When I regained my wits, I ran home and found my daughter healed. Since then, I have tried every day to live in gratitude. This woman's story is powerful, isn't it? The story of a woman and her great love for her daughter, for a woman who had faith in the power of a healer. Most importantly, I think, or most dramatically at least, she insisted on counting herself worthy of God's love and healing, even in the face of this long-standing bigotry between her people and Jesus' people. Just a crumb of recognition is all she asks. A crumb of acknowledgement that she is no less a person than the people whom Jesus has already healed. From our seats here today listening to this woman's story, I hope we understand and respond to her and to her pain in the face of her daughter's illness, to her desperation to save her daughter. And I hope that we're angry that her exchange with Jesus was so much more difficult than the previous healings we've seen in this gospel. She worked so hard to convince him, as I read the story. Many have tried to soften the blow of Jesus' treatment of this woman. There are a few popular explanations for how Jesus treated her. Well-known preacher Barbara Lundblad writes, "Over the years, people have tried to clean up this story. One attempt goes something like this. Jesus was testing this woman to see if she had enough faith. Here's another option to soften Jesus' word. The Greek word kanarios, translated dogs, really means little dogs. Puppies. So when Jesus tells the woman it is not fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs, he really means puppies. Does There's one more possibility. Because this woman submits to Jesus and kneels before him, Jesus heals her daughter. One led concludes, we'll do almost anything to make Jesus who we want him to be. But we see here a side of Jesus that's really uncomfortable, at least for me. And frankly, I don't think these explanations do it for me. I don't buy any of them. Not when I read this story, hear this woman's voice. There's something more going on here. There's a sort of darker side to this really human Jesus that we see today, who, like us, was raised in a culture in which people, I don't think, really got the enormity of God's love for everybody. It's a culture in which people carry around biases and superiority complexes and prejudices, just as we do. It's a culture in which there's a kind of cruelty toward the other that can have horrific consequences if it's not checked. So I'd like to imagine together what this story might sound like if Jesus told it from his perspective. It was a hot day as we walked from Tyre up towards Sidon, and I was exhausted. I've been trying for weeks to have some quiet time alone to think about the death of my cousin, John. I tried to steal some time away by myself, but it was no use. The people would always find me, always need something from me. No matter how far I rode from shore, or in what deserted place I tried to hide for a while, they were always there, waiting for me. Such beautiful people, needing what I could offer. I healed, I fed. Then the Pharisees and scribes tracked me down, hoping to trip me up over traditional hand-washing rituals, not understanding that what goes into the mouth is far less important than what comes out of it. Constant nitpicking over tradition, it wore me out. I walked along the dusty road, my followers with me. We walked through some tiny village along the way, and I became aware that a woman from the village was shouting at me to have mercy, to heal her daughter. Canaanite, none of my concern. Just a dog from people I had nothing to do with. I walked on, but her shouts continued, and they began to prick at me. Someone, maybe it was Peter, I can't remember, urged me to send her away, to make her stop shouting. I reminded myself that I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Maybe I even said it aloud. Lost sheep, I told myself, not these foreign dogs. And then she was in front of me on her knees, asking me to help. And as I looked at her, this Canaanite, I heard in my head all those things I had heard since I was a child. About the Canaanite dogs, about their pagan gods, about their despicable ancestor, Canaan, their unworthiness. And I told her it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And I started to move on. But with great courage, she stood and moved right in front of me. She met my eyes and said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Her words brought me up short. Her love for her daughter, her faith in a healing crumb. What had I just said? It's what comes out of the mouth that defiles. Suddenly, it was clear that she was like everyone else, a beloved child of my Father. My heart went out to her. I told her what great faith she had. I assured her about her daughter. Then I moved on. What I didn't tell her that day was what a great teacher she had been to me. She brought me face to face with the realities of the prejudices I had inherited since childhood. She brought me face to face with the size of my task. There are lost sheep in all places, not only in Israel. My task is to love them all. Father Richard Rohr, who is the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, writes, "One could say that the central theme of the biblical revelation is to call people to encounters with otherness. The alien, the sinner, the Samaritan, the Gentile, the hidden self. Think for a moment about how often Jesus strives to encounter those different from himself, or can't help but encounter those different from himself. The Samaritan woman at the well, the tax collectors, all of the outcasts that he went out of his way to share meals with, this Canaanite woman. We've seen the other a lot in the news. In fact, we see the other anytime we read stories of war-torn countries, the us and the them. We've seen the other this week as millions of people mourn the loss of Robin Williams, somebody who touched a lot of people's lives, even though they never knew him. But if we don't know about addiction, if we don't know about mental illness, if we don't know about what it is to consider suicide, we don't see him as he was, but as the other. We see it in the news this week of the 16-year-old black man, Michael Brown, who was shot by police officers in Missouri. Just one of the last of a string of young black men who have died or been beaten. We don't know the circumstances. We can't say the right or wrong of the situations. But we do know that there still exists in this country the other along racial lines. Rohr also says when there is encounter with the other, when there is mutuality, when there is giving and receiving, and both are changed in that encounter, as I believe both Jesus and this Canaanite woman were changed. That is the moment when you can begin to move toward transformation. May we, like Jesus, experience those encounters with others. May we experience the transformation that allows us to see that our mission is to love